Greetings adventurers! In today's video, I'll be showing you how to make this simple dungeon tiled game board for your D&D encounters. So, get out your crafting supplies and let's go! To create my game boards, I like to use these cork notice boards. I get these from Tesco in the UK, but if you're in the US, I've left some alternatives in the links below. I like using these cork boards as they are the perfect size, are light, rigid, and won't warp. I also like that you can carve into the cork to make texture if needed. If you are unable to get these exact boards, you could use any rigid material such as MDF or masonite board. You could even try thick cardboard, but it will probably warp depending on the size of board that you create. These boards measure 16 inches by 16 inches, and the first step is to measure and find the centre, drawing a central line from each side. I brute forced it a bit here, as I mislaid my long ruler, but it doesn't need to be exact. This will form a guide as we place our tiles, working from the centre out. To create our tiles, we will be using the secret ingredient, egg boxes. The reason I love this excellent material is that on one side it has an interesting texture, which can be used to create a rock or stone effect. It is light, easy to cut with scissors, and simple to stick down. To create the tiles, I have measured and marked out 1-inch squares. Again, I haven't been too exact, as I want my board to have a rustic look. Once marked out, cut the tiles out with scissors. If you're a youngster, make sure to get adult supervision here. To further sell the effect of these being stone slabs, I have cut and torn into the corners of some of the squares. This small step makes quite a big difference once the board is complete. Once you have enough for your board, we will need to stick them down. My favourite glue for this job is Arlene's Tacky Glue. Again, I will leave a link in the description, but you could use regular PVA instead. Working out from the middle, place the tiles with a small 1mm gap. Just remember to have the textured side facing up. You may also need to trim down a few squares to fit around the edge.
One eternity later.
Now all the tiles are stuck down, we have something which is beginning to resemble a game board, but I want to increase the realism and texture of the board by adding some sand. I'm using Battlefield Rocks by the Army Painter, which is essentially sharp sand, fine sand which has some larger stones. I run PVA glue between some of the tiles and gaps where we have broken corners. I sprinkle the sand in these areas and lightly pat down with my finger. Once these have dried, we need to pour off the excess. I also like to knock off most of the larger pieces, as these are prone to chipping off once painted. The final step here is to add some cracks to the tiles. I used an X-Acto blade to score some jagged lines on some tiles. Again, make sure to get adult supervision if you're a youngster. This step adds another layer of texture when we paint the piece. To prime the board, I have used black Vallejo surface primer and added some regular PVA glue and a drop of water. I find this helps seal terrain pieces and makes them more resilient to gameplay. You could use regular black acrylic, but make sure to add the glue. Paint this all over the board. You can get away with being quite liberal here, as the card absorbs a lot of the paint. Make sure to get the paint between each tile and work it into every nook and cranny. Make sure to let it dry thoroughly. To create the stone texture, we're going to dry brush and work up through a dark grey to light grey. When dry brushing, you need to make sure that you remove nearly all the paint from the brush using a paper towel. This way, the paint only catches the raised areas of the texture, which gives a nice transition of colour. It is important to let the piece dry before adding the next layer. Here, I'm adding the lighter grey. I decided that I still wanted a further highlight, so I mixed in a little white paint to create a lighter tone. You will find that each layer dries much darker than it initially looks, so don't be alarmed if it seems a bit stark. I'm really pleased how this looks, but we can still take it a step further by adding some moss and weeds growing through the cracked paving slabs. To begin with, I'm going to add some 4mm tufts in a few areas. I've tried to focus these to areas where the slabs are missing corners. They are already sticky on the underside, but I like to add some extra strength using some PVA glue. Adding flock gives a mossy effect. Lay down some PVA glue in some areas. I find that between the slabs works particularly well. I'm using a coarse turf flock. Like adding the sand earlier, pat it down with your finger and make sure to let it dry thoroughly. Once dry, you can tap off the excess flock and you should have a board which looks awesome. To add an extra layer of protection to your game board, I suggest giving it a coat of varnish, especially if it is going to see a lot of play. I find a liberal coat of matte or satin spray varnish usually does the trick. So there you have it. You now have an awesome game board on which to stage your own epic encounters. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Until next time, happy adventuring!